it's 10:31, so I'm going to jump in because we've got a lot to present today. So I think I'm going to welcome everyone and thank you for attending. Just a quick update. Last presentation, I gave a bit of an update on the planning proposal and the dates that we would set for the local planning panel and the council meeting. They are the September planning panel meeting date has been confirmed. Can I get everyone, please, to just mute your microphones? And so we're on track for the September approval and the October approval. Last time we had a bit of a discussion on the staging and planning, and I thought we would follow up with our second webinar, which speaks a little bit more about the architecture and the design, and I guess give you guys a little bit of insight in terms of what our processes internally, and also the design process when we kind of bring a project to life. Before I do a little bit of speaking, I thought I'd quickly introduce our speakers for today. I'm welcoming Paul, Angus and Nick. Paul's from PBD Architects, Angus obviously from Henderson and Co, where you can see there, who was responsible for the interiors, and Nick, who's going to talk to us a little bit about landscaping. But before we get to the guys, I thought I would start quickly with I guess one of the things that makes Sekisui House unique to maybe some of the other developers that you might work for or you might see in the industry is we actually have our core vision and design principles, and we've kind of, which is quite suitable for our site, we've kind of centered on a one with nature theme for sanctuary, and what the four pillars of design that basically stem from, Sekisui House Japan have been doing this for over 50 years, have been developing communities for over 50 years. So, these guys learned something along the way, and they've introduced us to these four pillars, which are Satayama, Michi, Gohanoki, Enbai, Yutaka. And these are four principles that we try to integrate with all our community design developments. And I mean, some of them are a little bit geared towards low-rise housing, but two in particular, Satayama and Michi, we've really kind of integrated within our master plan. Satayama, for those in simplistic terms, it's basically the interface between nature and people. And we thought this really critical to our site, considering, I mean, yes, it's an old industrial site that used to have factories, but we're pretty much surrounded by nature on three sides of our master plan. We pretty much, Hill Road is our boundary. We've got two sides of nature, one side of water and river. So it was quite critical for us to ensure that we had that connection between the natural elements and the built environment. And the built environment can be bulky. We've got it's high density, so it can be difficult, but I think we've done it successfully as part of our master plan. So what we've done is we've tried to design parks in certain locations to attract wildlife. We've introduced species of plants and fauna that will attract some of the natural, wildlife. And the idea there is, in simplistic terms, attract some of the birds that are in the surrounding areas and bees, so that they kind of, they come to our master plan as well. The other thing is we're conscious of, the existing natural ground, cultural values of the area, and a lot of those landscape corridors, especially to the west of us, they'll be rehabilitated, enhanced, so that we can encourage the natural biodiversity. Satayama also relates to things like stormwater. We've basically positioned our site so that most of it kind of runs towards the Parramatta River. And what we've done is we're successfully introduced elements within our landscaping that Nick will probably touch on a little bit later, that filters that stormwater before it actually gets to Parramatta River, so that it's, clean water is actually going into the river. And I guess the other one is the ribbons of green. Satayama is pretty much ribbons of green, and you can see that, along Hill Road, what we've done differently to the other side of Wentworth Point, we've introduced that linear park to create more of a landscape buffer. We've also done it to the rear of the site, where we've got a bit of a landscape verge along Sydney Olympic Park. And I think that was kind of a special addition to what we've introduced to the master plan. The other core principle, which I'll touch on before handing over to Paul, is a concept called Michi. Michi is basically the interactions between people and place. And we've been really conscious of establishing a place, and we've engaged with placemaking consultants and strategists to assist us on this in this regard. And Michi is basically a landscape design philosophy that focuses on creating a journey. So that journey that people experience when they leave their apartments, they'll walk down to the building, they'll walk through landscaped areas, and it's about how people experience both the natural environment and the built environment, and how we connect the two. And the basic philosophy behind it is we're trying to basically rejuvenate people. And I think, I guess, in this time of COVID and lockdown, I think it's more important than ever that we design these beautiful spaces that will reset people psychologically and provide a bit more of a positive experience so that they can, not spend most of the time locked up in an apartment. They can get out and use the pathways, use the natural connections to nature. So I felt those two were really important. And those two concepts are something that we generally will brief our designers, our architects, our landscape architects, our interior designers, and basically they'll draw inspiration from those principles and they will integrate them into the design. And it's something I'm sure you'll see with some of the presentations from the guys. So that's just a brief intro from myself. I'm going to now hand over to Paul from PVD Architects, who will share his screen, and he'll basically illustrate how he's taken our design philosophies and concepts and introduced them into the design. Paulie, over to you, mate.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone see that screen? Yep, great. My name's Paul Buljevic, Director at PVD Architects. I might just explain a little bit about the practice and I guess how we share some of the same philosophies as Sekisui. We're a practice of 30 plus staff, so we're a mid-sized firm. At any one time, we run in the order of 70 to 80 active projects, so we're quite a busy practice, and we take our work typically from inception all the way through to completion. Hugely design-focused practice. We really strive for a balance between pragmatic, efficient spatial planning and innovative architecture. And I guess we look to bridge that gap between design principle, the conceptual narrative, and what we deliver in terms of an end product. And we can see the synergies in terms of working with Sekisui, who take their core principles and really try and invigorate that into a design scheme that not only energizes that design philosophy, but produces an end outcome of quality in terms of residential development as well. So, and that ties across both architecture, brand, and the development in its entirety. So what I'll do today is I'll walk through an introduction to the master plan, but I do want to touch on some of that conceptual narrative. It's a little bit of architectural speak, but I think it's important in understanding how we respond to those core Sekisui principles before we sort of move on to the more pragmatic, sort of looking at floor plan layouts and amenity and aspect and views. So just to give you an idea about siting of phase 5. So number 2 on the left there is the Laguna building, and that flanks the village green on the western edge. So that's a 13-story building. It's got obviously that northern aspect out towards the Foreshore Park and the river. This 13-story building has a single core arrangement. Given its height, it's a scissor stair type arrangement. You can see that, or get a glimpse of that residential entry off that northern frontage, the servicing aspects off that south and southwest edge, such that we maximise the opportunity for outlook and frontage towards the park and the view. Number 3 is essentially what we're calling the Glade building at 8 stories. It has a dual core arrangement and has both the pedestrian lobby entries coming in off that village green, what we've shown there as Baronia Way. What's indicated as number 1 is essentially that village green. So it's informally dedicated to phase 5, but publicly accessible essentially to all residents. And we'll talk a little bit more detail around the mechanics of that village green in slides to come, as well as our landscape architect. You can see Sanctuary Boulevard being number 5 towards the north, and how we sort of bleed in that landscape design towards the village green, essentially. Number 4 is what we're calling the Revive building. So that's a communal facility building that accommodates a swimming pool and gym facilities, and that's a lower scale built form, and you'll see some CGIs of that building in the slides to come. So Ed touched on Sekisui's core principles, and I guess what we've done in terms of our architectural approach in the conceptual arrangement is to incorporate these core principles within a theme inspired by nature, utilising these components of nature's organic fluid form and texture within our built form design. So when we're looking at architectural design and putting a built form together, there's really 3 steps that we take. And it looks at a primary form. It starts to then look at the articulation and the horizontal and vertical treatment of a built form, which brings that articulation together. And then we sort of move into a 3rd tier, which is typically looking at the finer grain detailing. But what we've done in this instance in working with these core principles is introducing this theme of nature. So look, those images towards the right of this slide really inform some of the conceptual narrative around how we've derived the built form, how we've applied fluidity within some of the horizontal ribboning you'll see on the architecture, and then moving into that finer grain detail again that we're picking up in elements of nature that start to inform some of the architectural detailing, screening, some of those finer grain detailing you'll see on the architectural presentation. So looking at sort of those pragmatic ways of how we've adopted that inspiration, we're sort of taking a master plan envelope and articulating that in a form that expresses that fluidity, that sculptural element. But each time we apply some of these themes inspired by nature and Sekisui's principles, they're done in a pragmatic way. They're done in a way that promotes views. They introduce more corner apartments. They promote a sense of identity or corner expression, or they give a sense of arrival at that ground plane public domain level where it informs an entry or an entry node at that ground floor expression. So it's always adopting something at a conceptual level, but putting an informed narrative around it that has a pragmatic way or a pragmatic way of improving the amenity of these apartments. And you'll see that on some of these slides. They're quite intentful in terms of an indentation here might promote a view or additional aspect towards the north or natural cross-flow amenity. And there's some of the sort of steps that we've taken to derive the built form. And I think they're quite important diagrams to at least understand the basis for how we've approached the architectural built form. And you'll see that in these perspectives. So that lower perspective is essentially taken off Sanctuary Boulevard, northeastern section, probably about midway through that road. And you can get a sense that building in the forefront is the Revive building at sort of two stories with that rooftop component. Behind that is Glade at 8 stories. And to the right, you'll see Laguna. And when you're looking at those earlier considerations in terms of built form, you can see how we're applying that fluidity to create that corner expression of Laguna, for instance. We've got a thicker ribboning detail along those podium levels to, again, promote more privacy in a pragmatic way, but also help the form in giving it a sense of grounding and a lightened sense of detail as you approach the upper levels. And then we talked earlier about how we use that finer grain texture inspired by nature to introduce some of these finer screened elements, the softer touches which provide texture along the facade, but also help identify principal nodes of entry. They identify the corner of the built form and sort of move that expression amongst those 3 buildings as a cluster of buildings that relate to one another in that sculptural form. They have their own identity, but they carry through some of the palette, some of the design intent, that fluidity, that organic form. So you'll see Laguna is a 13-story building you'll see to the top left, and Glade being the 8-story building on the top right. So we'll just touch on the village green. It's quite a flexible space. It's quite passive. It has a perimeter planting type structure to assist in making it a more pacified space. It has a higher ground condition, which helps promote outlook over Sanctuary Boulevard through to the foreshore. It's, as mentioned before, it's informally dedicated towards phase 5, but it is publicly accessible to all residents. You'll see some annotations there in terms of some of the features accommodated within the village green, including an amphitheatre, water features, some barbecue areas, and again, a tree-lined edge, which helps create that framing towards the park, and a good flexible open lawn space, which can be shared and accommodated and used by residents. And we'll let our landscape architect, Nick, sort of move into more detail of what's been provided in terms of facilities along that village green. So moving into the floor plans and looking at Laguna to begin with. So this is just a CGI off that northern edge. You can see that recessed indentation, which helps break up that bay component and sort of juxtapose some of that horizontal ribboning treatment with some verticality as well to break down the mass. But again, in terms of a pragmatic reason, that is introducing more corner apartments, natural light and ventilation aspect, and solar orientation as well. So I'll probably focus on a typical plan, but just to give you an idea about that ground plane level, so courtyard apartments again flanking the north and the village green towards the east, and keeping the servicing component through towards the south in terms of access to the basement, loading and bicycle parking you'll see along that edge. But sort of zooming in on a typical plate, you'll notice that this building, or both buildings, in fact, this entire phase has no single orientated southern facing apartment. So again, strike on that principle of amenity is maximising the apartments that have outlook towards the river, towards the foreshore park, towards the village green. We're really maximising the number of apartments that have that northern orientation. If they don't have a northern orientation, it's northeast or northwest orientated. And again, this building being 13 stories, having a scissor stair arrangement, a dual lift arrangement, access to natural light and ventilation to the lobby, and then honing in on the apartments themselves. Again, balancing the pragmatic with the beautiful. So essentially looking at the spatial quality in terms of the interior layouts that maximise the opportunity for furnishability, uninterrupted wall space within the living area such that one can furnish, it can add artwork, entertainment units, it can be adequately furnished without interrupting the flow of that space, and using size and proportion to maximise furnishability and flow within that apartment. So you get an idea through here. Again, plenty of storage. The master bedroom will always be of a size and proportion that's larger than the second. It has additional robe, ensuite. This is our kitchen with an island bench. All our 2 and 3 bedroom apartments have an island bench. Again, plenty of storage. Second bathroom, readily accessible from the second bedroom and for guests. And again, storage and a laundry cupboard. And that theme in terms of size and proportion is carried through in all apartments. So again, you'll see a living room here of an equal size and proportion at a minimum at 4 by 6 metre clearance. Kitchen with an island. Some consistencies along the way in terms of wet area detailing and kitchen detailing, which Angus will run through in greater detail. But that consistency allows for repetition, but it also allows for structural alignments, minimising transfers, ensuring ceiling heights are maximised throughout each apartment, and that connection through to the private open space is also maximised. And you'll see that the private open space is generous. It exceeds sort of apartment design guidelines in terms of what would be the minimum. We far exceed those. So where we have an opportunity, we have living rooms with a dual orientation such that they achieve the northern outlook but also frame the park towards the east. And again, similar theme carried through for each apartment. The 1 bedrooms typically will accommodate a study, again having entry doors to bedrooms and bathrooms, off an alcove rather than off a living space. The proportion of living space is again adequate in terms of accommodating, a good sized lounge set and dining table. We move on to wider fronting living spaces, similar principles, obviously a wide fronting living room, having a longer proportion through here, but again, enough clearance to accommodate furnishability. Masters with additional robe and en-suites. Second bathroom in this location, and studies where possible. So you'll see that theme is accommodated. We're predominantly 2 bedroom apartments across the spread, and we'll walk through the mix at the end of this presentation. This is quite a popular layout where we have bedrooms split on either side, an additional study, again, bedroom and bathroom doors off that nook through here, a walk-in laundry in this instance, but always, accommodating a size and proportion that is adequate for that size and apartment. I'll just zoom out of that. And largely typical floor plates, we do accommodate some larger apartments where we end the podium and express that verticality you saw in the CGI components. Again, wide fronting living room, dual aspect. The proportions generally increase for a 3-bedroom. So 2 full bathrooms, master with additional robe through here. And again, these apartments are carried through on those floor plates. Where we do have the opportunity, we have not only dual orientated apartments, but dual orientated living spaces. So having those corner living arrangements, are quite good in terms of amenity and outlook and natural light. So aside from the fact that these apartments are not directly north facing, they will have an abundance of light and ventilation with that dual orientation. Again, as we move up, we typical apartments in terms of 3 bedrooms, and all these apartments are typical from what's happening below. We do start to look at amalgamation on those top 2 levels where we have a 3-bedroom in both the northeast and the northwest orientation. Again, 4 living rooms with that dual orientation. I'll keep moving through. We'll have some questions at the end. This is essentially looking at Glade, so an 8-story building. Given it's an 8-story building, there's no requirement for a scissor stair or an additional fire stair. So we've split the building in two cores, and what that does is it maximises the amenity. It maximises the opportunity for dual aspect apartments. So this building far exceeds apartment design standards in terms of access to both solar as well as naturally ventilated apartments. So having all these dual aspect, again, wide fronting living rooms in this instance, creating really good amenity. These are northeast, northwest facing apartments. Again, having that bank of 3 facing north and maximising that opportunity to achieve good amenity. All the same principles as you saw in Laguna have been adopted in Glade in terms of room sizes, proportion and clearances. And the furnishability, really focusing in on that pragmatic sense of, how one would reside in these apartments and how they would add their own layer once they move in. You can see the access of that public domain at that ground level is off the western edge, adjacent to the village green. Very generous sized lobbies across the spread of both buildings. Again, typical apartments throughout. Natural light and ventilation. Again, no single orientated south facing apartments throughout the entire complex, which is quite an achievement. You can see both lobbies have access to natural light and ventilation. I'll just zoom in on a couple of these plans. I know I won't be able to go through every plan, but I think it's important just to understand some of these principles. So again, having a sense of a little bit of a relief, almost an L-shaped type living space, but maintaining those clearances, oversized kitchens with plenty of storage, additional storage and linen press off corridors, keeping access to these bedrooms off a corridor and not a living space. Again, master of a good size proportion with a walk-in and an ensuite, the 2nd bathroom, again, readily accessible by guests in that 2nd bedroom. Cupboard laundry through here, but really focusing on maximising storage and amenity within the apartments themselves. And you start to get a sense of, albeit these 80 to 86 square metre apartments are quite generous, but even a 75 square metre 2-bedroom north facing does not feel like an undersized apartment because of the maximising the efficiency of how one moves through the space, minimising corridors, and applying as much area to the living space essentially as possible. You get a sense of how that fluidity and how that inspiration of that concept narrative has informed the form, but also promotes better outlook and relief in terms of these dual orientated apartments as well. This is looking at the Revive building. So this is essentially north of Glade, so between Glade and Revive. So we have our pool facilities at this ground level. We have a gym facility through here and a rooftop gym component as well, with an opportunity for an active edge along the southern component of Revive with a cafe proposed along this section, which will help promote activity and engagement along that edge. Architecturally, or from a design intent perspective, it has its own identity, this building, but it carries through some of that finer grain materiality and palette and that organic form that has inspired Revive. What we've done is we've pushed all the facilities in terms of bathroom and change areas down into the basement, which is accessible via this lift and stair, to maximise that opportunity for quite a large swimming pool, and also allows for that opportunity for that cafe edge. And Angus will go through some conceptual images we have of the interiors direction for this scheme, and I'll push ahead with this because I know I'm running over time. The gym on level 1, again, quite an open floor plate. This is not a gym that's sort of a leftover space as part of a development of this scale. This is a fully purpose gym that can accommodate quite a bit of equipment, as well as a rooftop covered area through here facing north, which will be quite an enjoyable space to be in, actually. These are just some diagrams which show the extent of dual orientated apartments across both Laguna and Glade, and again honing in on that decision to create indentations and use this fluid form to promote outlook, more corner apartments, and hone in on how we present and articulate the built form as a balance between the horizontal and verticality of the design. So every apartment essentially has a certain quality. It has an outlook towards the village green. It has an outlook towards the foreshore park, the river, and northern orientation, really maximising that opportunity to create good amenity for every single dwelling. And you can see Glade has quite a number of dual-oriented apartments. It's quite unique to have such a low number of apartments serviced off each core. So it adds to the fact that although it's within a 170-odd apartment development, you still have that intimacy of having a low number of neighbours, essentially. Some sun-eye views. These are essentially just showing throughout the course of the day the extent of solar access on both buildings and of course that village green. As a summary, as mentioned earlier, across both buildings, we're quite heavy loaded on the 2-bedroom apartments at circa 78%, 15% 1-bedroom apartments, and circa 6% of the 3-bedroom arrangements. So that's 26 ones, 134 2-bedroom, and 11 3-bedroom, totaling 171 apartments. As discussed, that basement car parking quite generous in terms of its car parking allocation, and Ed might go into further detail about the allocations, but essentially all 3 bedrooms have 2 car spaces. The 1-bedrooms have a car space, and some of the 2 bedrooms will have 1 or 2 bays. And that's sort of it in summary. This is a sort of a product placement mix for each built form. So this is looking at Laguna and an apartment mix, as well as Glade across that spread we discussed. And I'll just finish on that image, which is encapsulating both Glade and Revive in this image. So to giving a sense of that quality, you can see those splayed edges along those podium levels of Glade sort of mimic what's happening in Laguna, but at a different scale, but tying in as a cluster of buildings that theme of both Sekisui's principles as well as PBD's in terms of how we look to balance the pragmatic and what we see as being, quality architecture.
Definitely. Thanks, Paul. That's a great presentation. Yes, in terms of just quickly touching upon parking, the regular parking will launch sales of apartments without allocating the individual spots, and we'll do that at the end when we deliver the building. But as Paul discussed, 10% of 2s will have, and it will be the premium 2s, and it will be shown on the price list which 2s get the actual second car spot. So the premium 2s will get a second car spot. The 1s will have 1 car space, and obviously the 3s will have 2 car spaces. There's also the amalgamated apartments. So if any of your purchasers want a 4 or 5-bedroom apartment, we do have the amalgamated apartments that Danny or some of Paul can speak about, and we're planning to present that at the next webinar, where we can show you how 2 apartments can join to become 1 apartment to create a larger apartment if required. Before I hand over to Angus, I know a lot of you are keen on interiors and CGIs for kitchens and bathrooms, and when are we going to build the bathroom? I mean, we're pretty early in the stage of the cycle. We're in lockdown, so it's very difficult for us to get to site to build and deliver these things. But what we thought important was to provide you with some guide and direction on what things might look like. Rest assured, Sekisui House apartment, you know, it's going to have a level of quality a minimum level of quality that we will deliver. But Angus will take you through some of the sketches and working drawings that we're going through at the moment, just to give you a taste on what's to come. So they're not CGIs, but they're going to be presented in a way to give you a bit of an idea on the flavour of the design and the inspiration behind some of the interior design. So I'll hand over to Angus to take over.
All right, thanks very much, Ed, and thanks, Paul. So my name's Angus Henderson from Henderson & Co, and I'll be taking you through two presentations today, the first being what we looked at for the apartments themselves, and then we're going to spend a little bit of time on Revive. So this was a document prepared for Sekisui. As Ed touched on, this is a design document that we've put forward and we're in the workings of now in developing. So as Ed touched on originally, we've got those Sekisui design principles, and we very much wanted to touch on those and make sure that those are encapsulated within our interiors. So we saw three core brand pillars and their translation being important in the formation of the interiors. The first being the design principles, which you see on the left-hand side of screen here, being the Sekisui design principles. The second core tenet or pillar is being one with nature. This was something that came out of the branding and the geographical location, as Ed touched on, being flanked by nature on three sides of the development. And then being at one with the architecture, it's very important that there is a cohesive brand and design story that's told from the architectural landscape through the architecture into the interiors. So the design language very much picks up on that development of design cues that Paul has touched on, seen both in form and in material. If we look at the schemes, we've got two schemes to offer purchasers. The first being earth. The earthy tones, or the warmer scheme, has these earth tones of brown, warm timber and light grey. And this is a really rich scheme to appeal to all buyers, we believe. These are some reference images where we start the design process and looking at extracting kind of design cues from these natural forms. So form, pattern, colour palette, and the quality of light were things we all looked at. The second scheme being water. For us here, we're looking at tones of white and grey with matte finishes, very cool, clean and contemporary for the younger buyers. So we always like to find schemes that appeal to a wider range, so both the youthful and/or more conservative buyer as well. So with the water here, obviously sitting right on the waterfront there, we've looked at transparency in pattern, form, the colour palette, material, quality and light quality. In the materials themselves, we looked at having materials that are highly tactile, so materials that you want to touch and that you interact with. The first scheme here, shown on the right-hand side of page here, is the earth scheme. So here we're using a timber laminate, seen top left. We're using a porcelain terrazzo, shown through here. We're using porcelain tile. We're using full wool carpets, reconstituted stone benchtop, and splashbacks. We're using this highlight decorative laminate material that's got a really lovely material quality to it, and when light hits it, it plays on that texture of that notion of light management rather. And then we've got some decorative tiles, which are a hand glazed ceramic tile. For us, we're always trying to create material schemes that don't feel like, generic multi-residential finishes. We very much want them to feel like a private residential level of finish. So that's something to bear in mind, and you'll very much see that when you interact with the materials in person. As Ed mentioned, these are not marketing CGIs, these are sketch form 3Ds that we use to translate our design thinking to the client and the team. But I wanted to take you through some of these images today. So one of the first things you'll notice, and building upon that relationship to the architecture, is you'll notice a lot of curve form that's brought into the interiors. The first is actually the apartment entry door that you pass through. Then we've done small gestures here, like curving the edges of bulkheads and softening. So really trying to move away from right angles where we can, to soften and build upon that notion of flow, as Paul has talked about, moving in and around the home itself. You'll see that material form rather is then taken through to the island benchtop, which has a breakfast bar functionality that you can sit at, which is really important to us. This white material that's shown through here is called a legato finish. Unrendered, it's very hard to appreciate what it is, but to the touch, it's incredibly soft, and it almost has like a fabric type softness to it. It's so again, tactility is really important. We've got stone splashbacks and bench tops, and we've got these custom hanging rails, hanging shelves rather, that are sitting above the cooktop area with a mirrored built-in range hood. And these are display shelves really for spices or glassware or crockery or whatever you may like. Fisher & Paykel supplying all of the appliances, and there'll be I believe, a subsequent webinar with Fisher & Paykel that'll tell you about all the great developments that they've been making and why they've been adopted on this project. If we move through these images, we've also made colour changes to the internal carcasses. So again, just playing with the really soft tone-on-tone textures and colours. We've also added hanging rails here for cooking utensils. So just little kind of touch points there that add a point of difference. Storage within kitchens is always really important, as you'd appreciate. In here, we've opted for large drawers to the rear of the kitchen. So really trying to maximise the internal space of storage itself to maximise usage for the purchaser. And then there's a view back, looking back towards over the island, back into the living room itself. If we look at then the 3-bed scheme, you'll notice that the kitchen itself becomes larger with integrated French door refrigeration, and we go for a natural stone floor through here. So we are looking at a limestone, which is again very tactile, so underfoot really soft and really beautiful to walk on. One thing I neglected to mention is lighting throughout. Lighting, all premium LED lighting throughout, but we've also put pelmet lighting in many of the rooms, the first of which in this instance is down the corridor into the main living area. So you have this beautiful wall washing, grazing effect to the living space, kind of leading you into the space. We have a beautiful door hardware that's been selected the whole way through. Again, this shows the premium nature and again the kind of tactile nature of some of the finishes that we're bringing in. This is showing elevation there just to give you an idea of how it all comes together with the curve forms, the floor finishes, skirting, lighting, bulkhead treatments, etc. Okay, if we move into the bathrooms now, this is the first scheme being Earth. We wanted to have something that was very calming and contemporary. As you can see, we've added this curve form to the his and her shaving cabinet. So these have got full edge lighting around. So they'll have a beautiful backlit nature, and we're always conscious of how people look in when they're using the mirror, and having that rear illumination is some really beautiful soft lighting for those standing in the mirror. They've got full storage behind them with power points within as well, so you can plug in any electronic devices you need. we've got that porcelain terrazzo floor the whole way through, this beautiful decorative handmade tile, and then full wall tiles around. We also have this beauty ledge that sits the whole way across the rear of this section of the bathroom itself, and pendant lighting, pelmet lighting rather, washing down that shower zone. So really calming and relaxing spaces. When we look at the typical bedrooms, we've got, as I said, full loop pile carpet throughout. We've got pelmet lighting and window head dressing steps through here, so the head of the curtain disappears, which is just a discrete detail through there. And then moving on to what we were talking earlier about form, we're actually rolling the edges of these plasterboard walls as you come into the robe. So these little soft touches to build upon that language of form. Full timber laminate cupboard doors to the robes with those decorative handles to open them. The laundries are really well proportioned, with the sink in the corner and supplied with a dryer with adequate space for your washing machine, fully tiled throughout. Then if we have a look at the water scheme, you'll see here that the finisher scheme is cooler, and this is that more contemporary and youthful scheme out of the two. So if we move through and have a look at how that translates into the apartments, you can see that's quite a lot darker. And I think this is going to really, motivate the more contemporary and youthful buyer as well. When we look at 3 beds, the main change, as mentioned there, is with the French door integrated refrigeration, and then the natural stone floors, which is a really premium touch to those 3-bedders. So we're bringing that, we'll be looking at having an integration from internal to external with the coloration of that material, so that eye really runs as it carries out external. And then into the bathrooms. And then into the bedrooms. Okay, and one offer that we're having here is that for the 3-bed purchases, we're discussing with Sekisui now, having a level of customization, so having private design consultation with us to add that kind of level of private residential touch to it. So that's something we're discussing now, which we believe will appeal to those 3-bed purchases. So I'm now just going to move on to the Revive building and briefly talk about what we're looking at for Revive. Okay. So this is really a really exciting building, as Paul has taken you through in the previous presentation. So we're working through this at the moment. We really wanted to create, though, a space that has a luxe spa-like quality to it. And these are some of the material images and kind of interior strategies we're looking at for the lobby entry as you come through. So again, playing with the materials that are highly tactile, and soft, and playing with curve form and natural finish. So this is coming in through the front door, where we have a rear illuminated glass brick backdrop with the stone reception counter and waiting bench. We're using a rough white coat render the whole way through, so very kind of textural, and that would all be grazed with pelmet lighting throughout. Lift taking you up to the gym and the rooftop gym component, and then a beautiful stair that's kind of shrouded in timber, linking in with what's happening on the external characterization of the building. The change rooms and wet areas, again, being really important in any of these gym spaces, that these are really calming and practical spaces. So here's a look of the look and feel of what we're looking to do in these spaces. Again, really neutral tones and playing with texture. You can see that those kind of curved forms have then followed through from the architecture and made their way into the interiors. So that fluidity of form was something that's really important to bring into the interiors themselves. So there will be sauna, steam and spa function within. This is a look at the steam being very white and ethereal in nature, where the sauna is much darker and warmer and more full of timber. So that contrast between the two. Here's a view looking into what the sauna may look like, with that view connection into the main pool. And the indoor pool area itself, very white and light in nature, maximising, all of that beautiful glass we've got sitting around and the landscape that kind of hugs the edge of that building. So here's a view looking down the length of the pool with that rough white coat render the whole way through the walls with a polished plaster over the ceiling. And then these kind of apertures that you can see through from the sauna and spa. And there'll be an element of brand integration through here as well with the logos of the Sanctuary brand. So there's a few 3Ds looking there. The gym, as Paul touched on before, is a very much a serious gym. It's gone well beyond what would typically be offered by most developers from a gym offering. Here's a bit of a look and feel for the material palette through here. And Techno Gym, the supplier of the gym equipment themselves, have put together some preliminary layouts. This gives you a bit of an idea from a scale perspective, just on how much equipment will be there, and then the diversity of equipment from strength training down this end through to cardio training around the edges, with functional training sitting through the middle. So it really caters very well to both novices and advanced users of the gym. Some basic 3Ds here of what that equipment layout looks like. And as I mentioned, we're working through the interiors. The interior strategies haven't been applied to these 3Ds as yet. And topping out this building is a really beautiful outdoor gym area, which has functional training on the rooftop itself. Okay, I'll back to you, Ed.
Thanks, mate. Great presentation. A couple of things I might add. These are just working drawings, so there's no, they're not CGIs. They're basically trying to provide our partners an insight on the things that we're working through at the moment. They'll probably take another 4 weeks to have the proper CGIs developed and made for presentation to your customers. And the other thing I wanted to touch on in the kitchens and the balconies, there's a couple of things that we've done that are different on this building than our previous building. So all the range hoods are ducted, so they're not recirculating, they're actually ducted to the outside. And all the condensers for the air conditioning are not on the balconies. We felt it important not to actually encumber the balconies with condensers because of the outlook. So there's no condensers on balconies, and range hoods are ducted. Nick, I'm going to hand over to you, buddy, with the talk through some of the landscaping and some of the placemaking principles in that neighbourhood green.
I heard
That's
it.
okay. That's okay. I'm just trying to fill the gap there with a bit of.
I'm sure you did a good job.
All right, mate. I'll
My
hand
name's
over
Nick
to you.
Metcalf. I'm a landscape architect from Site Image. We've been fortunate enough to be involved in numerous developments with Sekisui. The good thing about working with Sekisui as a landscape architect, as Edward touched on, is their commitment to landscape and the environment. So it's always a pleasure.
Sorry, Nick. Can you share your screen? Oh, there. Thanks.
Yeah. Can you see that? Okay.
Yep.
Paul touched on the village green area, and that's what we really focused on from a landscape point of view. And just to give it some context, the two buildings, of course, Laguna and Glade and Revive, was all part of, and the externals areas was the main part of our scope for the design of this stage. The Foreshore Park actually tells a bit of a story of how we developed this village green and how we came up to what is really our vision for the space. The foreshore park, some of you may know, is to the north here, and then beyond that, of course, is the water and the foreshore itself. That's going to have a lot of amenity, lots of playgrounds, barbecue areas, lots and lots of active spaces. So we sort of thought and stepped back and thought, well, this space can be a bit more of a passive space. It can still be a flexible space where we really envisage more sanctuary community type events, markets, cinema nights, small gatherings, etc. But due to the amount of amenity supplied up here, we really thought this could be a genuine village square that a lot of the time it would be a quiet space. It's going to be wonderful to look upon. The design itself, this sort of nebulous, natural form, has been inspired by nature around the site itself, which is so fortuitous to be surrounded by water, bushland, even to the back. And those organic shapes have really started to shine through when we developed this area itself. So that was just giving a bit of a background on how it sits amongst these three buildings which we're talking about, and obviously prominently between Laguna and the Glade. Coming up a bit closer to it, you can see this large flexible open space flanked by beautiful trees. This area is probably, which has got to kind of be unique in a way urban design's moving, and it's giving the space back to pedestrians. While there's going to be cars circulating through the whole area itself, it's all going to be raised, much more like a European plaza. So when you step out of your apartment or you're passing through the space, it will feel it's not car dominated and that it's people dominated. It's a pedestrianised area, which I think gives a lot greater feel that these roads aren't carving up all these spaces and all the connectivity. So looking at some of the amenity here, a small barbecue space. While I did mention the foreshore will have a lot of amenity, we thought it was important to include an external barbecue space, mainly for the folk that are going to be moving in here. While it is open to the public, we do feel it's going to be probably more highly patronised by the residents of Laguna and the Glade. We've strategically placed a lot of the trees as to not just stepping back, blocking any beautiful views that are going to be created out to the foreshore itself. And at this point, we should note that this foreshore park is actually depressed down about 3 metres. So, and the park itself, the village green, is actually raised up again around another metre. So the views across, you'll be at a higher vantage point and really give a great feel to this landscape area. Just some precedent imagery up here, a small bit of water play, which sort of talks to the revived building and the more civic nature of this end of the space as well. Tree plantings, which has been touched on, which is of a high priority to provide shade and all those important environmental attributes which Sekisui is so committed to. And a small toilet facility as well, so you could spend the afternoon out here without having to go back to your apartment, etc. And the rest of the space we see, as I said, for meeting, picnics, maybe even small organised events as well for the sanctuary community. A few more bit of precedent imagery, beautiful modern architecture for this facility buildings, which will probably tie in to the two buildings adjacent. Large palm plantings, all native, which will allow view sheds right across to the water itself. High quality materials. It's going to be a very special, simple space and be beautiful to look down on, even if you aren't engaging with it on the ground plane. Some of our greening stuff for who's ever interested in plant material, etc. But going back to Satoyama and Michi and the principles of Sekisui, very important that we're adding to the ecology of the area and creating a better space, which ties better environment, which ties back to wellness and all those concepts of biophilia, being surrounded by nature and trying to get some fauna back into the site from what is originally there. This is the northern end, and this is to show that connectivity to that really special foreshore park, which will be delivered later on to the development itself, and just showing that strong connection where traffic will be peeled back and pedestrians will be given the priority. So the Laguna building itself, or building in, much like the Glade itself, will be ensconced in landscape on the ground plane particularly. This is the ground floor plane, providing that really important privacy aspect for those ground floor terraces. And again, bringing back to those principles, bringing nature as close to the building as possible, concentrating on native plants, maybe a few exotics, but really trying to give the place a sense of place and bringing some of that bushland type species right up to the development. a bit similar in some of these breakout spaces. We've got plenty of landscape surrounding them, which will create really good buffers from wind and privacy from other developments as well. Another gathering space up on level 10. Plenty of landscape, trees brought into the development. What's probably a really important note here, we have tried to bring as much landscaping as possible. We aren't relying on fangled things like green walls, etc. Traditional planters, which will be maintained easily, which we believe is pragmatic and will allow for a low-cost landscape to be sustained throughout the development, and not any nasty surprises with high strata fees, etc. We really made sure that the landscape areas are simplified, but giving the best outcomes possible. We believe that you don't have to be over the top or too avant-garde with your landscape, providing good soil volumes and really simple areas for your landscape to provide those trees, shrubs and ground covers to get a really good outcome. Again, around the Revive building as well, bringing some greenery around the edges there, promoting well-being at one with nature, etc. And that's the end of my presentation. Just going back to the master plan itself to recap.
Thanks, Nick. Just two things, if you can. Can you comment on level changes? Just,
Yeah.
I think a few people have discussed potential views and view lines and tree selections and things like that. If you can comment on that, please.
The village green itself will be raised around 1 metre, and then we provide this amphitheatre area to bring that level down there. Down to the foreshore park, it's around 3 metres lower as well. So there will be a steps to transition down to that space down there. So very much this would be a vantage point. And with that, you can see the clumps of trees that we're strategically located to allow for those great views across the foreshore park into the foreshore itself and into the river.
Thanks, mate. And there was one question in relation to the space and the neighbourhood size of the neighbourhood green. I know it's probably, I don't know, 50 metres guessing, but do you have a dimension?
About 60 metres by about 20-25 across.
Okay.
So it's a good village size. It's a
60, 70 metres separation.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks, mate. That was great. Fantastic.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I'll just open it up before we finish up, and I might get Paul Wainwright, our sales and marketing manager, to jump in and finish this webinar. But if there's any questions, we're happy to take questions from the team. No? Okay. Paulie, do you want to wrap up?
Hi all. Can you see me?
Sure can.
Excellent. Thank you. Look, excellent presentation, team. Ed, Paul, Angus, and Nick. Really appreciate your time today, and obviously to everyone else who took the time off their busy schedules. We know it is some difficult times, but we're super excited about what's coming up for our next stage, and obviously for you, our internal and extended sales teams. John, I just saw a message come through from you in relation to can you get a copy of all of these presentations? So we internally will amalgamate a combination of all of this content and make that accessible through Danny. I guess some of the things...
It is being recorded, Paul. Sorry to jump in. This webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available to all.
There we go. Fantastic. So look, as you can see, we take a lot of pride in surrounding ourselves and working with really experienced and collaborative team consultants who, in a lot of instances, are award-winning, and we focus on that placemaking connection and not just throwing up another building. And you can see the fantastic master plan evolution that the likes of Paul and Angus and Nick and the extended Sekisui house team have delivered. Probably a question on everyone's list. What's next? The next thing we've got planned is another webinar on the 28th of September. From now till then, we'll continue to evolve and develop a lot of the information and content and collateral, which will be managed and drip fed through to you by our Sekisui house team and your contacts within our team. And that focus of that next session will be very much more on be sales driven. A lot more detail on the individual floor plates and floor plans, the finishes, information about contracts, processes, strata management, how the communities are set up, along with our building management structure, which has been really successful to date. So I'm sure for many of the external channel partners who are working very closely with Danny, if you've got questions, you'll work through with her, and then her in line with myself and the marketing team to provide that information. There'll be some EDM templates which are being designed and delivered to be distributed to your VIP and broader databases as well. So thank you all very, very much. Thanks again, Ed, Angus, Paul and Nick, for your time and really valuable insights. And unless there are any further questions, we'll call it a day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.
Thank
Be
you
safe.
all. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.